Hey, as I mentioned earlier, today we're continuing this series on the purposes of church. So normally here at Bay on Sundays, we sort of go through a book of the Bible, sort of passage by passage, and sort of work our way through that. But at the moment, it's a little bit different topical series that we're doing together. And if you were here last week, you'll remember that we started looking at, why is it important that we have these purposes of church? Why is that a helpful thing? And we looked at that first one, exalt. If you missed last week's sermon, I actually encourage you to go back and look at it. It's on our YouTube channel. That would be a helpful thing to kind of see why we're doing this. It sort of sets the scene for what we're doing. So if you missed it, go back and have a look. And we laid out these 5 purposes, 5 tasks, 5 sort of focus areas that are going to help us here at Bay. And so they're going to help us to do what we want to do, which is love God, love each other, and love the world. So here they are on the screen, and I'll just quickly remind us of them. And the first 2 come from that passage that Jackie just read, the greatest commandment that we read from Matthew 22. And from that we saw last week, our first purpose is to exalt God. We want to worship him. We want to lift his name high together, because he says, what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your being. Then second, today we'll look at engage. That's looking at engaging in loving service using our unique gifts, because Jesus said, what's the other important commandment? Love your neighbour as yourself. So that's what we'll cover today. Then the next 3 purposes are from the Great Commission passage. So Matthew 28, we're told to evangelise. Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations. And then once people come to faith, we want to encourage people. So Jesus says, baptise them, incorporate new believers into church, encourage them, build them up in their faith. And then lastly, the last purpose is to equip people. We want to grow people in Christian maturity, because Jesus says, teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. And so we're in the middle of doing this series. Each week, as I said last week, we're going to look at one of these purposes, one at a time. It's this sort of topical flavour. And then at camp, we're going to get together and sort of think about, okay, how can we apply this at Bay? How's it going to help us here at Bay? So that's the sort of journey we're on. And a bit of a quick recap. And so let's move on to that second one, which is engage. And this concept of engaging actually reminds me of something I used to do with my first car. I got this car when I was 17, didn't have a huge amount of money, and so I used to want to try and save petrol all the time. And guys who know me know that this was a bit of a problem for me at times, but I had this habit of trying to save petrol, and what I used to do is, as I was going down a hill, I'd pop it into neutral, econo gear I used to call it. And so I'd coast down the hill, not using as much petrol, probably saved me all of 1 cent, but we used to put it into neutral and try and roll down these hills. And a common hill that I used to try and do it down was down the southern outlet, starting at Mount Nelson and then coasting all the way towards Kingston. And I had this great hope or great dream that one day I'd get all the way to Coles, Kingston. All the way from the top of Mount Nelson. I'm going to roll the whole way. Now, one time, very late one night, we had 5 guys in the car. Some of them are actually here. And I thought, I've got 5 guys. We've got a bit of weight, bit of momentum. We're going to get all the way there. This is the night. And so at the top of the outlet, was booting along, popped it into econo gear, down we went. Flying down the outlet, late at night, not breaking the speed limit at all. Now, we're going along pretty fast, but as you can probably picture, there was one thing in the way of us getting to Kingston. That one thing being this hill, the first side overpass hill. That's the thing that was going to stop us. But we're going pretty fast, and I thought, we're actually going to make it. We're going to do it. We went on, and we started rolling up that hill. I thought, we're going to get past that bridge and into Kingston. But eventually, we came to a stop, probably about where that black ute is. And then we even started rolling backwards. Now, as fun as it was to try and roll all the way into Kingston, what it showed is that cars aren't actually much use in neutral, are they? Cars need to have their gears engaged in order to go somewhere. And likewise, what we're going to see today is that we, as a church, need to not be in neutral, but actually engaged in something ourselves. What do we need to be engaged in? The loving service of others. What we're going to see today is that actually coasting along is not that healthy for us. If we're going to stay in neutral, if we don't engage in loving other people, then eventually we too will come to a stop, or we too will even go backwards. Like a car, As a church and as Christians, individuals, we need to be in gear in order to go anywhere. As individuals, as a church collectively, we're called to minister to people, aren't we? We're called to minister to all sorts of needs. We're called to care for the spiritual, emotional, relational, physical needs of people. We're to love our neighbour as ourselves. And we're called to do that with our unique gifts. Now, part of that will happen here on a Sunday morning as we use our gifts to serve here, but it's also throughout the week as well, isn't it? The call to love your neighbour is not just here on a Sunday, but it's in how you interact with people all through the week. So, let's think about this topic together of engaging in service using our gifts. And we're going to think about it under a few different headings. And the first heading is actually to say, don't engage. Now, that seems like a sort of strange way to begin. You know, I've just said you have to engage, you should engage, that's the best thing to do. But actually, first, we need to realise that there can be some wrong reasons for engaging in service, that wrong reasons that we want to avoid. Now, I heard this from a guy called Rowan Hills, and I think they're a helpful warning. Now, he says, don't engage in somewhere like church. First of all, don't engage to impress others. And that's true, isn't it? Because sometimes what might be motivating us deep down is that we actually want to look good in front of other people. It's serving, we want to engage because we want to be noticed. You know, maybe we make sure we're on the roster just so someone else can see that we're doing that. Or maybe we're trying to exalt our own reputation rather than God's reputation. You know, this can show itself, can't it, if we're only ever willing to do the sort of high-profile things. Or it might show itself if we get our noses out of joint if people don't thank us for doing things. You know, if we're going to be people who engage, we don't do it to show ourselves to be good. No, we do it because our intended audience is actually God. But even if our intended audience is God, if we're serving because we want to serve Him, then we actually need to be careful, because another wrong reason to engage is if we're serving because we think that we need to help God out. Now, we could easily have that attitude that we are some sort of gift to God. We serve Him because He needs us in some way. You know, God is deficient. He needs us, otherwise He won't get the job done. Rather than realising that actually, no, God is working through us. Now, that attitude might come if we start thinking that it's all about our performance. You know, it's the awesome skills we have, the awesome service that we bring. Or it might come out if you're the sort of person who spends a lot of time doing ministry and a lot of time telling other people about all the stuff you're doing, but very little time actually praying to God about it. You know, how often are our proud heads up, kind of looking around and saying how good we are, compared to our heads are bowed down praying, God, please use me. I'm weak. I don't have much to offer. Please use me. We can't be serving because we're trying to impress others, or we're trying to think we can help God out, as if God is weak and won't be able to do it without us. Also, don't engage to try and get something from God. You know, this can creep in, and we wouldn't blatantly say it, but we might be thinking, you know, if I serve coffee this week, then God will bless my business. Or if I play music in the band, then maybe I'll get good marks at school. No, God is not someone you sort of barter with. You don't serve God because you're hoping to get something back. Paul says in Romans 11:35, who has ever given to God that God should repay them? You know, God will never be in your debt. And also the flip side is true as well, because the fourth reason why we shouldn't engage is to try and pay God back. Now, it's a wrong motivation, isn't it? If we're serving because we feel that we owe God something. You know, we owe Him for what He's done for us. Now, there is a really positive way to respond to what God has done. You know, there's that sense of love and amazement and gratitude for what He has done for us, that gift of grace, and there's that desire that you want to follow someone who's been so loving towards you. But that's very different from a negative feeling of thinking, I am indebted to God. I have to pay Him back. You know, God's given me so much, so I need to try and pay it back in some way. You know, that feeling of I have to balance the equation. You know, that's serving God out of guilt, isn't it, rather than out of love. That's serving because you feel you have to rather than you want to, because you love God. And so can you see there's actually a bunch of reasons to not engage. Don't engage to impress others or to help God out because he's deficient in some way. Don't engage to try and get something from God or trying to balance the scales, trying to pay him back. Instead, let's think about, well, why should you engage? What are some good reasons to engage in service? And we're going to engage because a bunch of reasons. First, we're going to engage because God actually engaged with us. You see, Jesus didn't come to earth because he had a bunch of odd jobs to do and he needed some sort of minions to help him do that. No, he came to fulfill the great purpose that God the Father had given him to do. He says himself in Mark 10:45, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." You see, the big story of the Bible is not about God needing us, but us needing God and him sending his Son to restore that broken relationship that we had with him. Jesus engaged in loving service, in self-sacrificing service to his Father. Why? It was for our benefit. He gave his life so we might be freed from sin and the power of death. He took the punishment that we deserve so that our sins might be forgiven. And so because Jesus engaged with us and was a servant for us, we now serve out of a natural reaction to that. You know, it's just like that parable that Jesus told, that, you know, the person who'd been forgiven a great debt should naturally go on to forgive others the debt that's owed to them. You know, that the person in the parable doesn't do that, but Jesus said, if you've been forgiven, then you start to forgive others. Or as John says in 1 John 4:19, we love because he first loved us. It's not, you know, we love so that Jesus loves us. No, it's we love because he first loved us. You know, we want to love others because we want to pass on that love that's been given to us. It comes to us and we want to pass it on to others. God's been patient with us, so we want to be patient with others. God's shown care and concern and lifted us up, so we want to lift other people up. We want to show that concern to others. God has loved us, so we want to naturally love others. God's engaged with us. And what we see in Jesus, you know, his costly, his self-sacrificing love actually becomes what we want to aspire to. He becomes our example. You know, Jesus explicitly says this, doesn't he? John 13. You know, he's just done the humiliating but loving act of washing his disciples' feet. And he says, now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, what do? You should wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I've done for you. And so as we respond to Jesus' model of service, his example, we also engage in service because God involves us rather than he needs us. You know, Acts 17, Paul says that the God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he gives everyone life and breath and everything else. And so our loving service of others is not something we do because we need to sort of help God up. We need to supplement God's efforts. No, God doesn't actually need us to accomplish anything, but instead, he lovingly involves us in that. Now, I think it's like if you're a parent and you try and get one of your kids, you know, a young kid, like a toddler sort of kid, to help you with something. You know, you're building something or you're cooking something, that sort of thing. Now, as a parent, you know, you don't really need that kid's help to get the job done, do you? You know? Actually, it'd be a lot quicker without them, to be honest. Sorry, kids, no offence here, but it'd be a lot quicker if your parents didn't involve you. You know, little kids make mistakes, that they slow things down, they ask way too many questions along the way, but we involve them, don't we? Because we love them, we want to have that relationship with them, we want to encourage them and show them and see them how they can share the joy of seeing the job done. They can do their little bit, and it does actually count towards it. And we love them to see how good it is to do these things. And as this little kid is helping out the parent, the kid's not thinking, oh, I better do this well, otherwise Dad won't love me, are they? They're not thinking that. They're not going to serve thinking, I'm going to serve so that Dad is happy with me, or I need to earn Dad's blessing. That's not what the kid's thinking. No, the kid's just joyfully being involved in what the parent is doing. And likewise, God doesn't need us. We don't need to serve him to earn our favour, his favour, but he actually involves us. He wants to deepen our relationship with him. He gives us unique gifts that will help build his kingdom, be on what he's on about. And as we do that, we actually experience the joy of being a part of what's going on in the world. Now that leads us to the third reason to engage in service, because it leads to joy and fulfilment. John 13, Jesus just told his disciples to wash feet after his example. And verse 17, after that, he says, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And by this, he doesn't mean, do this and then I'll save you. No, that's not the blessing. No, it's do this, follow my example, and from that, you'll get actually great joy and fulfillment. And I think we know this, don't we? We know this from our own experience. We know there's a vast difference between cooking a meal and just having it by yourself versus cooking a meal and sharing it with some other people. Much more joyful to be able to do that and serve others in that way. Or if I think of my life and the Christian things that I've been involved with, and I think, if God hadn't involved me in that kingdom work, I would have missed out on a lot of joy in life. He's involved me. I'm weak, I'm frail, but he involved me, and because of that, I've seen great joy. If I hadn't been involved, I've missed the joy of seeing people come to faith, or people work through sin or grow in their faith. I've seen some great things. It's brought me joy and fulfillment to see that. Why? Because God's actually involved me. Now, there's quite a lengthy quote from Charles Spurgeon. You can tell I've got all of Brian's old books. You're going to hear some Spurgeon quotes now. And it picks up on this idea that if you don't serve and love your neighbour, you're actually missing out on this joy and purpose. It's a long quote, but listen to it. He says, some of you would be a good deal better Christians if you would look after the poor and the needy around you. If you would just tuck up your sleeves to work and go tell the gospel to dying men, you would find your spiritual health mightily restored. For very much of the sickness of Christians comes through having nothing to do. All feeding, no working makes men spiritual dyspeptics. Be idle, careless, with nothing to live for, nothing to care for, no sinner to pray for, no backslider to lead back to the cross, no trembler to encourage, no little child to tell of a Saviour, no grey-haired man to enlighten in the things of God. You have no objective. In fact, you have nothing to live for, and who wonders why you begin to groan, to murmur and look within until you're ready to die of despair? But if the Master shall come to you and put his hand on you and say, I have sent you just as my Father has sent me, now go and do my will, you will find that if you keep his commandments, there is great reward. You will find meat to eat that you know nothing of now. That's a great quote. Be idle. How does that end up? You end up in despair. But follow Jesus, love your neighbour. You'll find a joy that you just didn't even know existed. And so given all this, given these reasons why we should engage, now what this leads to naturally is, well, how do we engage? How do we actually go about doing that? What are some things we need to consider as we serve? So for this last point, I've got 5 actually quick things to think about. So we've seen don't engage from amongst regions. Now why engage? Well, how to engage? We engage first by accepting the diversity of gifts. We need to recognise that when we serve, that there's actually a whole heap of ways that we could be serving. There's not just one gift and everyone does that. No, there's a diversity. Paul says, 1 Corinthians, there's different types of gifts. The same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it's the same God at work. Verse 29, he says, are all apostles? No. Are all prophets? No. Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? No. There's different gifts. There's not just one type of gift. Within this church, there's a great variety of gifts. Now, because of that, the next thing we need to do is actually engage in the unique gifts that God has given you. Romans 12, we've got different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. 1 Corinthians 12, all these are the work of the one and the same Spirit, and he distributes them to each one just as he determines. Ephesians 4, but to each one of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. That is why he says, when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. And so what does that mean? What it means is what you are gifted in might be completely different to the person that is sitting next to you. That's okay. That's part of God's design. And any gift, any skill, any talent you've been given is not because you're special, but God's actually given it to you. It's like a physical gift. It's like a present given to you. You haven't earned it. That's why it's called a gift. And us recognising this is helpful, isn't it? It's going to stop arrogance, us thinking, oh, I'm better than that person because I've got that gift and they don't. But it's also going to stop jealousy, thinking, oh man, I'm inferior compared to that person. They've got this gift and I don't. And so actually accept that God has given you unique gifts. And we know that God's done that and he's designed the church in that way because that's how the church will grow. Third, we can trust that God will grow the church through us using our gifts. Ephesians 4 says, God gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, the teachers. Why? To equip his people for works of service so that the body of church might be built up. And so each of us individually don't have all the gifts needed, but collectively as a church we actually do. I am a useless singer, but I can be content to know that there are people here who can sing. That's good. Praise God for that. It would be an absolute shambles if I had to lead us in singing. But for the church to grow, for us to fulfill our purposes, what it means though is every single person needs to use their gifts. There's a saying that there's no such thing as a well-rounded leader, but well-rounded churches. There is such a thing as that. No such thing as a well-rounded leader, only well-rounded churches. And so, because of that, what it means is we actually need to use the gifts that we have. Paul says to Timothy, for this reason, fan into flame the gift of God, i.e., use your gifts. If you have gifts, actually use them, and then they'll become even greater. Use them here on Sunday, use them during the week, but don't walk away from them. Now, you might be thinking, well, I don't know what my gifts are. Well, if that's the case, pray to God. Say to God, show me what gifts I have. Plus, pray that you be content with whatever he shows you that you have. And then talk to Christians. Ask them, what do you see me as being good at? What have you observed in me that helps grow the church and lifts other people up? Talk to me if you want. Talk to me about how you could help serve here at Bay. What could you do to love others here at Bay? How could you serve in God's kingdom more broadly, not just in Bay, but in the community? And what's key is if you're going to use the gifts that you have, know that it doesn't have to be big. Jesus said, didn't he, even a cup of cold water given to someone in his name, that is ministry. It could be serving coffee, it could be teaching, it could be showing hospitality, it could be serving in the creche. It could be things that you do during the week that isn't tied to Bay. It's being an encourager, it's being generous. All that matters is that you actually use your unique gifts. That's the key, isn't it? And then the final thing we need to do is do it in love. Serve with love. That's the final thing as we engage. I think it's no mistake that between the two chapters, all about gifts, 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Corinthians 14, all about using your gifts, is sandwiched 1 Corinthians 13, all about love. 1 Corinthians 13 normally gets used for wedding sermons, doesn't it? Maybe you even had it for your own wedding sermon if you're married. But it's actually about using your gifts. It's saying when you engage in serving others, do it in love. 1 Corinthians 12, all about gifts, ends with verse 31. Now eagerly desire the greater gifts, and I'll show you the most excellent way. Then chapter 13, all about love. And then he says, things like if you speak in tongues or have the gift of prophecy or give to the poor, but don't do it in love, that's pointless. And then chapter 13 ends with verse 13. Now these three remain, faith, hope and love. But the greatest of these is love. And so what it all comes back to is the reason why we engage. If we're just serving to impress others or we're serving to try and get something from God or trying to give something to God or that sort of thing, we're not going to be doing it in love, are we? but rather, if we're doing it out of a response to the love that God has shown us, we love because he first loved us. If we're doing it because we realise God's involving us and getting us to help out, even though he doesn't really need us, he wants to involve us for our good, then we're going to do that in love, aren't we? It's going to be soaked in love because it's all about his love first to us. We're going to see it as a privilege. And so I've rattled through a bunch of things then, and I want to bring it together, land the plane, so to speak. And I want to finish just by encouraging you to engage, surprisingly. And so if you're someone who's currently in neutral, you're sort of rolling down the outlet like I used to, then let me encourage you to see today as an encouragement to ram it into gear. You know, you might have to double clutch it or something to get it back into gear, but actually think about, well, how could I engage? You know, if you don't engage, you sort of run the risk of just sort of sitting and soaking and souring, don't you? You know, think about, well, how could I help at Bay maybe? You know, there's a new roster coming out, quick plug for that. You could get involved and help out in that. But it could also be through other stuff that you do during the week. It doesn't have to be at Bay necessarily. So think about how could you engage? So that's one sort of application. If you're not engaged, well, think about how you could engage. And if you are someone who is already serving, I know that's the majority of people here, then actually see today as an encouragement to keep going. You know, you might be feeling like you've had enough. You might be thinking, oh, great, now Keith's telling me to serve more. I feel like I'm serving enough as it is. I feel cooked. I've had enough. I need to stop. I need a break. And that could be the case. You know, sometimes we do need a rest. Sometimes our cars need to refuel or be serviced. But before we sort of automatically jump to that and think, all right, I need to stop serving, perhaps today might be some thought for a different solution. If you are serving and you feel like, oh, I've had enough, well, the solution could be to think about, well, what's actually driving you to serve? You know, is actually my real motivations for service the thing that is wearing me down? I'm trying to impress other people. I'm trying to pay back God back, and I just don't seem to quite be able to get there. Maybe that's the thing that's actually making you feel tired in your service. You need to actually think this week, what's my motivations for service? Or perhaps, this one's a bit counterintuitive, perhaps if you're feeling worn out and tired from serving at Bay, perhaps you need to increase your service and decrease some of the other things in your life that might be cluttering and taking energy. You know, you could have a whole heap of things in your life that aren't giving you joy and fulfillment like serving God would. Perhaps drop some of them off, serve some more and see what happens. That's dangerous, isn't it? But we see if we serve God, that'll bring joy and fulfillment. Now that's a challenge, isn't it? And we need God's help to show us the way. We need God to help us have that desire to love others as he's loved us. So I want to pray to him now. And there's a frequent prayer that Rick Warren, the guy who came up with these purposes, prays. He says he prays. He says, God, whether or not I get anything else done today, help me to love you and love others. That's a good prayer to pray, isn't it? God, whether or not I get anything else done today, help me to love you and love others. And so let's pray now together. Dear Heavenly Father, we pray that you'd help us to see today just how great it is that we can engage in loving service of others. Thank you that we do that because you first engaged with us. Thank you that we see that you've loved us so deeply and now you release us to love others and to pass on that care that you've shown to us onto other people. Thank you that you involve us. Thank you that we get to have the joy of seeing your kingdom grow in this earth. And please help us see where we can do our part. Thank you, Father, that you've given Bay just so many gifts. We've got so many amazing people here, all using their gifts for you, and help us see how we can do that more and more. Thank you that we've got people who are happy just to serve in the small, behind-the-scenes stuff. We've got upfront people and we've got everything in between. We thank you, Father, for the gifts that you give to this church. Please help us use them for your glory, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.